Hello you gorgeous people out there and welcome back to another video on the Rocket Hub. My name is Philip and today we're going to talk a bit more about SpaceX's involvement in the Artemis program. As early as the year 2024, NASA plans to land the next astronaut since 1972 and the very first woman on the moon. But this time the budget is a bit low, very low. The newly set up Artemis program is supposed to make lunar exploration cheaper, safer, easier, and sustainable. But because they are lacking some billions of dollars to pay for their SLS rockets, which cost about $2 billion each, NASA is really dependent on help from commercial partners. Basically, everything except for the astronauts themselves is going to be carried to the moon by non-governmental spaceflight companies. And as always, SpaceX had got a lot of the offered contracts. But they weren't the only ones to try to get NASA's funding for their contribution to the moon landings. Many other companies entered the competition, but in the end, all of them lost to Elon Musk's spaceflight emporium. This is the story of SpaceX showing their supremacy in terms of space transportation and how they outperform literally everyone at the Artemis program. Just a few weeks ago, SpaceX was awarded the Human Landing System contract, or in the short form the HLS contract, granting them $2.9 billion for development of a lunar lander based on their Starship vehicle. NASA announcing to have chosen SpaceX was pretty surprising for many of us, considering the competition being far less ambitious than Starship. But in the end, there were multiple reasons why NASA went with Starship, and I already made a video on these reasons. If you want to dive in deeper than we are going to now, maybe you should watch this video. NASA's decision left two competitors with no further funding and a lot of incomprehension. While the NADIC stayed relatively quiet about their loss, Blue Origin-led national team actively protested against NASA's decision, only to be rejected again. But that was just because of Jeff Bezos being a bad loser. Seriously, why do you have to slow down the development by a few weeks just because you can't accept that you had the worst design? SpaceX's Starship was by far the most ambitious proposal, but it still outperformed the two other proposals by far. SpaceX charged by far the lowest amount of funding with just $2.89 billion. Dynetics and Blue Origin wanted about double the amount of funding for their vehicles. And additional to that, Starship was the most sustainable vehicle and performed best. The national team's lander was just too complex and was based on some fully undeveloped propulsion systems and wasn't even able to lift much more than the astronauts themselves, and one of Dynetics was too heavy to land, meaning the design was impossible to realize. SpaceX had the best of the three designs and by far the lowest price. They simply outperformed their competition without them even getting close to their performance. And exactly that picture isn't limited to the HLS contract. SpaceX is involved way deeper into the Artemis program and especially into the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway, or short LOPG. NASA's planned space station in lunar orbit, which used as some kind of waypoint for the Artemis missions and for later missions beyond the moon. And guess who is going to launch the first two segments of the gateway? You're right, it's SpaceX. Around November 2024, those two segments will launch on a Falcon Heavy and mark the beginning of the station's assembly. Two other commercial launches for the construction of the station haven't been awarded yet, but considering Starship is going to be likely online by then, there's a high chance SpaceX will get the contract again. But why was SpaceX awarded this contract as well, despite having strong competition again, including the Atlas V rocket by United Launch Alliance, which has launched most of the NASA probes over the last decade? But the problem here is that the Atlas V and every other vehicle available hadn't the payload capability to launch both segments in one flight, and therefore requires two launches for the mission. The only vehicle with enough payload capacity to trans-lunar injection orbit was and still is the Falcon Heavy. And additionally to that, the launch cost of Atlas V is estimated at over $200 million. That's more than double the cost of the Falcon Heavy, for which SpaceX charges just $90 million when the rocket is expanded. The price for the reusable variant is likely much lower. You have to consider that you would need two Atlas V to do the same work as the one Falcon Heavy, and that means that the overall launch cost would be 4 times the price of the Falcon Heavy. And due to being launched at once, the two segments don't have to rendezvous and dock in orbit, and therefore the probability of a mission failure is significantly lower. And again, SpaceX simply outperforms their competition to secure them the contract. And SpaceX is even involved in a third area of the Artemis support missions, and that is the resupply of the Gateway. They are going to design another evolutionary stage of the Dragon spacecraft, which is currently used to transport cargo and humans to the International Space Station, and later this year for the first time for space tourism. The so-called Dragon XL is able to deliver up to 5 tons of cargo to the Gateway and will launch on the Falcon Heavy. And the reason why SpaceX received this contract as well is very simple. There was no competition. SpaceX were the only one to deliver the required spacecraft in time. SpaceX has secured many of the Artemis support contracts, and they have a high chance of securing them even more contracts in the future, because there's a lot to come. All the other renowned companies like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and many more are getting in serious trouble, and the new privately held space-like enterprises like Blue Origin can't keep up as well. SpaceX simply outperforms them in every possible way. Their services cost less than every competition, and at the same time they are capable of doing more. New designs like the other lunar lander proposals are often way too expensive and the technology often out of date. All of those companies are too afraid to innovate, which in the end leads to them being overtaken by SpaceX. And that picture doesn't just apply to the Artemis program. SpaceX has just recently launched their 19th mission of 2021, with more than half a year left. They have already conducted more launches than all of the other competitors together. While Blue Origin has to delay the rollout of their super rocket again, and Boeing has serious trouble to get their Starliner to fly, SpaceX services the International Space Station, launches satellites, and soon space tourists, and already prepares a crewed launch to Mars. And if no one wants to improve, Starship could cause a knockout of almost the entire industry. There aren't any customers who want to launch on a vehicle with limited capability and high price when something like Starship exists. SpaceX is currently outperforming the entire spaceflight industry, and it seems like literally nothing is able to stop them soon. But just a few years ago, many so-called experts called SpaceX's plans too ambitious and projected them many failures, but SpaceX has proven them all wrong. What a wonder. The industry seems to be unable to catch up these days, and the support contracts for the Artemis program are the perfect example for that. And that's already it for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did so, why don't smash the like button and subscribe to the Rocket Tub? I'd appreciate it a lot. We see ourselves next week, and until then, I'm out. Cheers!